My name is Leo. I'm 28, and my world is contained within the quiet, rain-slicked streets of Tacoma, Washington. It's a city of ports and patience, which suits me just fine. I rent a small but clean apartment overlooking a perpetually grey patch of the Puget Sound, and I spend my days as a lead field technician for a regional electronics service company. I fix complex network systems, commercial servers, and anything else corporate clients can manage to break. It's a job of logic and order, of finding the problem and applying the solution. It's not exciting, but it's steady, and it keeps my hands and mind busy. I've always been a listener, not a talker. I've never navigated the complexities of a real relationship. I suppose I always assumed that part of life would sort itself out eventually, but eventually seemed content to stay on the horizon. My daily rhythm was as predictable as the tide. I'd arrive at the office, run my diagnostics, review my service tickets, and head out in my van. Same process, same focus, every single day. And every day, the office was managed by the same familiar, comfortable hierarchy. Then she arrived. Clara. She was the new regional operations manager, sent from the Seattle corporate office to bring our underperforming branch up to spec. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with sharp blonde hair cut into a severe bob, and eyes so blue they seemed to analyze everything they landed on. She dressed in crisp blazers and tailored trousers, a uniform of untouchable authority. She had an intensity that was both captivating and deeply intimidating. She didn't engage in idle chatter or fake pleasantries. Her focus was a laser. To her, I was just another name on a personnel chart, another cog in the machine she was here to fix. Then, one Thursday night, everything changed. A catastrophic server failure hit one of our biggest clients, a major shipping logistics firm down at the port. The entire system was down, costing them thousands by the minute. It was an all-hands-on-deck emergency, and I was the first technician on site. The air in the server room was frigid, but I was sweating under the pressure. My primary diagnostic tool was glitching, feeding me corrupted data, and I was flying blind. Frustrated, I radioed back to the office for remote support, expecting to get one of the overnight dispatchers. Instead, about 30 minutes later, the server room door hissed open and she walked in. Clara, holding 2 cups of coffee, her blazer gone, the sleeves of her silk blouse rolled up to her elbows. "Reports said you were having a party," she said, her tone devoid of sarcasm, just pure fact. I was speechless. Managers, especially corporate ones, didn't make house calls. She handed me a coffee and peered at the terminal over my shoulder. "What's the data stream telling you?" she asked. I was so thrown by her presence that I almost forgot how to speak. "It's corrupted. The diagnostic unit is failing." She just nodded, her eyes scanning the racks of servers. "So, do it the old-fashioned way. Bypass the interface. Check the physical network connections one by one." She pointed to a junction box. "Start there." I stared at her, stunned by her technical knowledge. She saw my expression and a flicker of something, impatience or maybe amusement, crossed her face. "I didn't start in management, Leo." And just like that, she was no longer just the boss. She was a collaborator. For the next 3 hours, we worked side by side in the humming cold of that room. The professional barrier between us didn't just crack, it began to dissolve. We talked as we worked, our conversation punctuated by the snap of Ethernet cables and the whir of cooling fans. We spoke of hardware limitations, of corporate red tape, of the unique frustrations that came with our line of work. I saw a completely different person emerge from the corporate shell. I saw the exhaustion behind her sharp focus, the genuine passion she had for solving a complex problem. Together, we finally isolated the faulty switch causing the cascade failure. As I was replacing it, she leaned against a server rack, watching me. "You're good at this," she said quietly. You don't panic. It was the first compliment I'd ever heard her give anyone. It landed with a strange weight in my chest. When everything was finally back online, she offered me a ride back to the office to file the report, since my van was being left on site overnight for the client's morning crew. The drive through the deserted, misty streets of Tacoma was almost completely silent. But it wasn't awkward. It was charged with the energy of a shared victory. For the first time, I felt like she saw me not as an employee number, but as an equal. That night was a catalyst. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between us shifted in subtle but significant ways. She started calling me into her office to ask my opinion on technical deployment strategies, valuing my field experience over the directives in the corporate playbook. Our conversations, while still framed by professionalism, were layered with an unspoken understanding. An undercurrent of awareness flowed between us. I started noticing the small things, the way she'd tap her pen against her chin when she was deep in thought, the faint scent of coffee and something like rain that always lingered in her office. I found myself unconsciously looking for her silver sedan in the parking lot each morning, a small knot of disappointment forming if it wasn't there. The other technicians started to notice too. It was nothing overt, just quiet observations. Clara's leaning on you pretty hard for the new network bid, one of them remarked. I'd just shrug, but inside, my heart would beat a little faster. During our weekly team meetings, I'd sometimes catch her gaze from across the conference table, and she would hold it for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, before looking away. It was a tiny, fleeting connection in a room full of people, a secret that only the two of us shared. We were orbiting each other, getting closer with each rotation, and the gravitational pull was becoming impossible to ignore. I didn't know what it meant, or where it was going, but I knew I hadn't felt this awake in years. The inevitable escalation came during the final push for a massive project proposal. For 2 weeks, it was just the two of us working late into the night, long after the rest of the office had gone dark. The formal barrier of our roles, manager and technician, crumbled under the weight of exhaustion and shared purpose. We ordered greasy takeout and ate at her conference table, the city lights of Tacoma twinkling below. The conversations drifted away from fiber optics and service-level agreements. I learned she'd moved here from Denver after a messy corporate merger had cost her a promotion and ended a long-term relationship. She was fiercely driven, not just by ambition, but by a need to prove the people who had wronged her were mistaken. Her guard was down, and she spoke with a raw honesty that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. One Friday night, after we'd finally submitted the proposal just minutes before the midnight deadline, we stood in the silent, empty office, buzzing with adrenaline and fatigue. The air between us was thick with everything left unsaid. I can't go straight home, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. My brain is fried. Want to take a walk? I didn't hesitate. Yeah, okay. We walked down to the waterfront, the air cool and heavy with the scent of salt and creosote. We didn't say much at first, just listened to the rhythmic sound of our footsteps on the boardwalk and the distant foghorn of a ship out on the Sound. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark, churning water. Sometimes I feel like this is all I am, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the distant office buildings. Just a series of professional objectives, a fight I have to keep winning. I found myself opening up in return, telling her about my quiet life, my unrealized desire for something more than just schematics and solitude. We stopped near the glass museum, the colored lights from the bridge reflecting on the wet ground around us. The professional tension that had defined our relationship had transformed into a profound, personal magnetism. I could feel it, a physical force pulling me closer. I looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft, ambient light, and the carefully constructed walls I kept around my own heart began to feel like rubble. I had to say something, to acknowledge the dangerous territory we were entering. "This," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "This feels complicated." She turned to look at me, her professional mask completely gone, leaving only a raw vulnerability in her eyes. "It is," she agreed, her voice just as quiet. I took a half step toward her, the space between us now electric. "Clara," I breathed, the words tasting like a warning. "This is a bad idea." It was a plea, an admission of defeat, a statement of fact directed as much at myself as at her. There was a beat of silence where the entire world seemed to hold its breath. She didn't move away. She didn't argue. Instead, her eyes held mine as she closed the small remaining gap between us. She rose onto her toes slightly, put her hand on my chest, and kissed me. It wasn't a soft or tentative kiss. It was fierce and immediate, charged with weeks of unspoken tension, late nights, and the thrilling, terrifying recognition of finding a kindred soul in the most impossible of places. It was a kiss that said everything we couldn't say in the office. When she finally pulled back, her breath was unsteady, her eyes searching mine for an answer to a question she hadn't asked. Then she whispered the words that would echo in my mind for weeks. "Then why are you still here?" Before I could form a coherent thought, let alone a response, she leaned in and kissed me again. And this time, I didn't hesitate to kiss her back. The following Monday morning at the office was agonizing. The warmth and connection from the waterfront had been replaced by an impenetrable wall of ice. She was all business. Her emails were curt, her tone in the morning meeting was clipped and efficient, and she avoided my gaze entirely. She reassigned me to a different project team, citing a need for my expertise elsewhere, but I knew the real reason. She was creating distance, rebuilding the professional boundary we had obliterated. The whiplash was dizzying and painful. It was as if that night by the water, that raw and honest connection, had been nothing more than a fever dream. A knot of confusion and a deep, aching hurt settled in my stomach. She wasn't just putting up a wall, she was fortifying it with steel. I endured it for 3 days. 3 days of strained silence, of walking past her office and seeing her deliberately focus on her computer screen, of feeling like a ghost in the hallways we had so recently shared. By Thursday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, until the office was empty except for the two of us. I walked to her doorway. She looked up, and for a split second I saw a flicker of surprise, or maybe fear in her eyes before her expression went blank. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, glancing at the clock on her wall. "I'm leaving in 5 minutes, Leo." I stepped into her office. "I'll be quick." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, a defensive posture. She didn't speak first, leaving the uncomfortable silence for me to fill. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked, the question hanging in the sterile air between us. She blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you avoiding me? Why are you acting like Friday never happened?" She let out a long, slow breath and looked down at her desk, at a stack of perfectly ordered papers. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm protecting myself." I frowned, the confusion deepening. "Protecting yourself? From me?" She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a weariness that went far beyond job stress. "No," she said, shaking her head. "From what this could turn into." There was a long pause as her words sank in. "I liked that kiss, Leo," she said finally, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I liked it more than I should have." and that terrifies me." I didn't understand. Why? Her story came out in a torrent of quiet, painful words. Because my life is already a minefield. My career is the only thing I have that I've built for myself, the only thing that feels stable. At my last job in Denver, I was involved with a senior colleague. When it ended, he made my life a living hell. He spread rumors, accused me of using the relationship to get ahead. My reputation was shredded. This transfer to Tacoma, this wasn't just a promotion, it was an escape. It was my one chance to start over. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading with me to understand. I can't go through that again. I can't risk my career, and I will not be responsible for risking yours. You're a good technician, one of the best I've ever seen. I won't be the woman who ruins your career path. Every word she spoke was a logical, painful truth. All the arguments I had rehearsed in my head suddenly seemed selfish and naive. When I said you were different, she continued, that's part of the problem. With you it feels real, and that makes the risk 1,000 times higher. I finally spoke, my voice hoarse. I'm not asking for anything complicated. I like being with you. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. She whispered back. The silence that fell between us wasn't angry or cold. It was heavy with the weight of impossible circumstances, of two people wanting something they both knew could destroy them. I nodded slowly, the fight draining out of me. Okay, I said. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. She seemed surprised by my acquiescence. You're not going to argue? I gave her a sad smile. I've never been good at arguing, especially not when I know the other person is right. She stood up and I followed suit. The conversation was over. You're a good man, Leo, she said, the words feeling like a consolation prize. Take care of yourself. I gave her a small, final nod and turned to leave. My hand was on the doorknob when her voice, soft and hesitant, stopped me. Wait. I looked back over my shoulder. Her arms were no longer crossed. They hung limply at her sides. I'm not saying never, she said, her voice fragile. I'm just saying, not now. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out of her office, the two words, not now, echoing in the emptiness. That night, sleep was impossible. But it wasn't the sharp pain of rejection. It was the dull, hollow ache of being put on pause, of having a door opened just enough to see a beautiful room, only to have it closed again, with no guarantee it would ever reopen. Over the next month, I honored her request. I didn't go back to the office coffee shop, knowing she often started her day there. I gave her space. I didn't want to be another man who ignored her boundaries, who pushed when she had clearly asked for a retreat. I threw myself into my work, taking on the most difficult and remote assignments, anything to keep my mind occupied. But my thoughts drifted to her constantly. Every time I drove past the waterfront, I saw us standing there. Every time my phone buzzed with an email from her, my heart would leap, only to sink when I saw the professionally sterile subject line. One night, I typed out a long text message, pouring out everything I felt, ending with the simple promise, I'm still here if not now ever becomes now. I'm not going anywhere. I read it over and over, my thumb hovering over the send button, before saving it to my drafts and closing my phone. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the heartbreak, it's the waiting. It had been 29 days since I'd last spoken to Clara about anything other than work. I wasn't deliberately counting, but my mind had marked the time with a grim precision. Every time I passed her office, my eyes would instinctively flick toward her door, even as I forced myself to keep walking. I had kept my promise. I gave her space. No late-night emails, no lingering glances in meetings, no attempts to manufacture a conversation. but her absence in my life was a constant, tangible presence. I didn't just miss the kiss. I missed the easy camaraderie we'd found in that server room, the way her eyes would light up when she solved a problem, the sound of her laugh when she thought no one was listening. I missed being seen by someone who understood the quiet language of my world. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, our carefully constructed distance was shattered. A massive cyber attack hit our network, a sophisticated piece of ransomware that was encrypting client data at an alarming rate. It was a code-red, company-wide crisis. Corporate sent in their top security team from Seattle, a group of arrogant hotshots who only made the problem worse. The pressure on Clara was immense. Our branch was ground zero, and she was failing to contain it. I could see the panic starting to fray the edges of her composure. On the second day of the crisis, after nearly 48 hours of failed attempts, she appeared at my cubicle. She looked exhausted, her hair was a mess, and the authority in her eyes had been replaced by desperation. "Leo," she said, her voice low so no one else could hear. "I need your help, not as your boss, but as someone who is in way over her head." For the next 2 days, we were locked in the main server room together, a fortress of humming machines and frigid air. It was just the 2 of us against a faceless enemy. Fueled by stale coffee and a shared sense of adrenaline-fueled purpose, we worked in perfect sync. I handled the deep code analysis while she coordinated with the national security agencies. The professional hierarchy vanished, replaced by a partnership forged in crisis. In the quiet, exhausted moments between frantic bursts of work, the walls between us crumbled again. We talked about our fears, not just about the hack, but about our lives. She saw me not as a subordinate, but as a steady, calming presence she could rely on. I saw her not as an untouchable manager, but as a brilliant, resilient woman fighting with everything she had. Finally, at dawn on the 3rd day, we found a flaw in the ransomware's code. We exploited it, decrypted the servers, and saved the company from a multi-million-dollar disaster. We were sitting on the cold tile floor of the server room, watching the final data restore process, the rising sun casting a pale light through the room's small window. We were utterly spent, but we had won. She looked over at me, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes clear for the first time in days. "You were right," she said softly. "That night on the waterfront, it didn't feel like a mistake." She sighed, a sound heavy with a month of regret. "Pushing you away was just easier. It was easier than being brave." She admitted she was tired of letting a past failure dictate her entire future. "I have no idea how something like this between us could possibly work," she confessed, looking at her hands. "But I'm willing to try and figure it out. If you are." Slowly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 29 days. "Slowly is good," I said. "Slowly I can do." It wasn't a passionate declaration. It was a quiet treaty, signed in the aftermath of a battle, a promise to try. The next 10 months were a masterclass in patience and discretion. Our relationship was a secret we carefully guarded. We built a life for ourselves in the hours after 5 p.m. and on weekends. There were quiet dinners at my apartment where the only rule was we couldn't talk about work. We took long drives up the coast, exploring small towns, getting lost on purpose. At the office, we maintained a meticulous professionalism. It was a difficult, delicate dance, but it made the moments we had to ourselves feel sacred. I discovered the woman behind the manager was witty, kind, and had a surprisingly goofy sense of humor. She discovered the man behind the quiet technician was steady, supportive, and fiercely protective of the people he cared about. She was no longer a bad idea, she was the best part of my day. The turning point came in the fall. I was offered a senior systems architect position at a competing tech firm in Seattle. It was a huge step up, more responsibility, a significant pay raise, and a chance to lead my own team. It was also the perfect, elegant solution to our problem. If I took the job, the conflict of interest would vanish. We could finally be a normal couple, open and free from the fear of professional reprisal. I told her about the offer over dinner one night, expecting her to be thrilled. Instead, a shadow passed over her face. She was quiet for a long time, just pushing food around on her plate. "I don't want you to go," she said finally, her voice small. Then she took a deep breath and confessed something that floored me. "I went to HR last week," she said. "I disclosed our relationship. I told them everything. I officially requested a transfer to the Portland branch so that you could stay here and be promoted into the opening you deserve, so you wouldn't have to leave." We were at a crossroads, faced with the overwhelming proof of how much we meant to each other. She was willing to uproot her life and sacrifice her hard-won position for me, and I was willing to change my entire career path for her. It was the most profound declaration of love either of us could have made. After a long, emotional conversation, we made a decision together. I would take the new job in Seattle. It was the healthiest choice, the one that allowed both of us to thrive in our careers without compromise. It was a fresh start, a way to build our future on a foundation free from secrets and workplace complications. Today is my last day at the Tacoma branch. I'm packing the last of my personal effects into a cardboard box when she appears in the doorway of my cubicle. It's the middle of the afternoon, the office is full of people, and for the first time, she doesn't care who sees. She walks over and places her hand on my shoulder, a simple, public gesture that feels monumental. "Ready to go?" she asks, a small, confident smile on her face. I look up at her, at the woman I fell for in a freezing server room, the woman who I waited for, the woman who was willing to risk everything. "I think leaving a job this stable is a bad idea," I say, a playful grin spreading across my face. She leans down, her lips close to my ear, and whispers back the words that started it all. Only this time they're not a challenge, but a promise. "Then why are you still here?" I stand up, take the box in one hand, and her hand with the other. "Let's go," I say. We walk out of that office together, not looking back, leaving the complications and the secrets behind us. Our story didn't have a dramatic beginning, just two people who built something real and honest, slowly and carefully. And now, we finally get to live in it.